Imagine having the power to execute almost anyone you wanted. Armies obey your commands. Millions live under your rule. Your word can change the fate of entire cities. What would you do if someone betrayed you? What would you do if someone publicly insulted you? What would you do if an enemy tried to take everything you had built? Most people already know their answer. Now imagine spending your nights writing reminders like this. If someone insults you, it is their opinion, not your injury. The man who wrote those words wasn't a monk. He wasn't a teacher. He wasn't hiding from the world. His name was Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, the ruler of the largest empire on earth. And despite having more power than almost anyone in human history, he became obsessed with a strange question. Why do other people's words control us at all? Because Marcus eventually arrived at a conclusion so unusual that most people reject it the first time they hear it. He believed that between every insult and every emotion, there is a hidden step. And if he was right, most of us have been blaming the wrong thing. The obvious answer is that Marcus was simply different. Some people are naturally calm, others aren't. Case closed. Except the strange thing is that Marcus doesn't sound calm, at least not in his writing. The book we know as Meditations is often treated like a collection of wisdom, but that's not what it was. Marcus never intended anyone to read it. He wasn't writing a philosophy book. He wasn't building a legacy. He was writing notes to himself, private reminders. And when you read those reminders, a different picture appears. Instead of a man who had mastered his emotions, you find a man constantly talking himself through them. Be patient. Don't get angry. Don't seek approval. Don't waste time worrying about what other people think. The same lessons appear again, and again, and again. Which raises a question. If Marcus had already figured everything out, why did he keep needing reminders? Imagine opening someone's diary and finding the same warning repeated for years. At some point, you stop seeing wisdom. You start seeing a struggle. And Marcus was struggling with something most of us struggle with, the opinions of other people. The strange thing is that this shouldn't have been a problem. Marcus wasn't a teenager worried about fitting in. He was emperor. If anyone on earth had the luxury of ignoring criticism, it was him. But the more he wrote, the more it became clear that power hadn't solved the problem. Then life started testing him. Hard. In 161 AD, Marcus became emperor of Rome. Most people imagine this as the happy ending, the crown, the power, the glory. Instead, it was the beginning of the problems. Almost immediately, Rome found itself dragged into war. Soldiers marched, resources disappeared, pressure mounted. Then something worse arrived, not an army, a disease. The Antonine Plague. It spread across the empire. Cities emptied, families disappeared, entire communities were transformed. Marcus couldn't stop it, no emperor could. And that's where one of his most important ideas begins to make sense. Some things belong to us, some things don't. The plague belonged to the second category, his response belonged to the first. So while Rome suffered around him, Marcus returned to the same practice, reflection, observation, the notebook. And once you understand that distinction, something else begins to make sense. Marcus seemed convinced that most people misunderstood where emotional pain comes from. We tend to imagine insults working like arrows. Someone says something cruel, the arrow hits. Pain follows. Simple. Marcus thought something else was happening. He believed there was a second arrow. The first arrow is the event itself. The insult, the criticism, the betrayal, you don't control that arrow. The second arrow comes later. It's the story your mind immediately begins telling. How dare they? They're disrespecting me. Everyone must think this. I'll never live this down. Modern psychology would eventually describe something remarkably similar, the process by which an event becomes an emotion. Because events don't arrive with emotions attached to them. Interpretations do. Marcus believed the second arrow was often more painful than the first. And once you notice that pattern, You start seeing it everywhere. An insult arrives. You can't control it. Someone rejects you. You can't control it. A stranger misunderstands you. You can't control it. A comment appears online. You can't control it. Yet we keep trying. We replay conversations, rewrite arguments. Imagine different outcomes. We fight reality long after reality has already happened. Marcus spent years resisting that trap. Not because he didn't care what people thought, but because he understood something deeper. The more ownership you give to other people's opinions, the less ownership you have over yourself. And modern psychology has repeatedly stumbled into the same territory. Cognitive reappraisal, emotional regulation, the spotlight effect. Different names, similar discovery. The event is rarely the whole story. Interpretation matters, which brings us back to Marcus. For years, I assumed his greatest achievement was ruling Rome. History books certainly make it seem that way, but the more I read his private writings, the less impressive those things became. Because Rome was never the hardest thing Marcus had to govern. His own mind was. That was the real battle. The battle against resentment, against approval seeking, against anger, against the urge to surrender control of his inner world to whatever happened outside it. And maybe that's why his writings still feel strangely modern. Because most of us aren't fighting Parthians. We're fighting comments, comparisons, rejections, embarrassments, the same battle, just wearing different clothes. By the end of his life, Marcus hadn't discovered a way to avoid insults. He hadn't become emotionless. He hadn't stopped caring. He had simply become aware of the hidden step, the gap between event and reaction, the space where interpretation happens, the place where the second arrow is either accepted or refused. And that may be the closest thing this story has to a secret, not confidence, not power, ownership, what I call psychological sovereignty. The ability to remain the owner of your own internal state, to recognize that other people can offer judgments, but only you can decide whether they become injuries. The next time someone insults you, try watching for the hidden step, because that's where Marcus spent most of his life looking, the place where suffering is either created or refused. Imagine two people hearing the exact same insult. One carries it for weeks, the other lets it pass in a moment. The difference isn't the words, the difference is the story attached to them. Marcus understood that. That's why he kept returning to the notebook. Not because he was perfect, because he wasn't. The goal was never to become impossible to hurt. The goal was to stop handing ownership of your inner world to everyone else.